hope you're having a lovely holiday and enjoying your break from school and having a nice time with your family. And we're coming towards the end of our story now. And I hope you've really enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed reading it. So we're coming to the end and we've been through all the different worlds with the Nutcracker and with Mary. And this chapter is called The Capital of Toyland. I like the sound of Toyland, don't you? Anyway, I will waste no more time with my endless waffle. The little Nutcracker again clapped his small hands, and then the Rose Lake grew more agitated. The waves washed higher on the shore, and Mary saw coming towards her from the distance a boat or a floating chariot in the form of a shell, like one glowing sun-bright sparkling gem, drawn along by 2 gold-scaled dolphins. 12 dear little boys, dressed in caps and pinafores woven out of hummingbirds' feathers, sprang on shore and carried first Mary, then Nutcracker, softly passing over the waves and onto the boat. Oh, how nice it was when Mary drove off through the rose spray and the rose waves. I like the sound of a rose sea, don't you? The 2 gold-scaled dolphins lifted up their heads and spouted crystal jets high in the air, and as they fell back in gleaming and sparkling rainbows, 2 sweet voices like little bells of silver seemed to be singing, "Who sails upon the rosy sea? A darling fairy it must be. Little fly, shoo-shoo, little fish, boo-boo, swans, ta-ta, gold finch, tra-la, stream run low, wind soft blow, all peace today, for here comes a fay." "Well, these little men that are carrying us are very merry people," said the Nutcracker, somewhat put out by the din, "but they will set the whole lake in an uproar if this song goes on." And so, indeed, there soon broke loose a confused tumult of extraordinary voices, which seemed to be floating all around in the air and the water. Yet Mary did not mind them, but looked hard down into the scented rose waves, out of which a sweet, pleasant girl's face smiled back at her. "Oh!" she cried joyfully, clapping her little hands. "Oh, just look, Herr Drosselmeyer. Down there is the Princess Pirlipat, who smiles at me so graciously. Do look, dear Herr Drosselmeyer." But Nutcracker sighed, almost mournfully, and said, "Oh, dearest Miss Starbalm, that is not the Princess Pirlipat. That is always and only yourself. Only your own sweet, pretty face that smiles so sweetly out of the rose waves. It must be a reflection, do you think?" At this, Mary quickly drew her head back, shut her eyes tight, and felt much ashamed. "Shouldn't be ashamed. It's an easy mistake to make, I'd say, Mary." Next moment, she was lifted out of the shelled chariot and carried on shore by the 12 boys. She found herself in a small thicket almost more beautiful than the Christmas tree wood. So brightly did everything here shine and glitter, especially admirable being the foreign fruits that hung on all the trees and were not only of singular colours but had a wonderfully fine smell. "This is Confection Grove," Nutcracker told her, "but there is the capital." What now did Mary see? How shall I attempt to describe to you, dear children, the beauty and splendour of the city, which stretched itself far over a flowery plain before her eyes? Not only were the walls and towers gay with the most splendid colours, but the form of the buildings was such as you've never seen on earth. For instance, instead of thatch, the houses had beautifully carved crowns on top of them, and the towers were capped by the most lovely gay garlands ever seen, like the ornaments on a wedding cake. I like the sound of that, don't you? When they passed through the gate, which looked as if it were built of macaroons and candied fruit, a band of silver-papered soldiers presented arms, and a little man in a brocaded dressing gown threw his arms around Nutcracker's neck with the words, "Welcome, noble prince, welcome to Confectionaby." Mary was not a little astonished to see young Drosselmere recognised as a prince by this highly distinguished person, but now she heard a confused outburst of tiny voices mingling together, such cheering and laughing, such playing and singing, that she could think of nothing else, and asked the little Nutcracker what this meant. "Oh, my good Miss Darbaum," answered he, "this is nothing remarkable. Confectionerby is a prosperous, lively city, and every day some kind of amusement goes on here, but be pleased to come a little further." A few steps brought them out upon a great marketplace, which presented a splendid sight. All the houses round it were of open sugar-work, story rising over story, and in the middle stood a tall, sugar-coated cake tree, like a monument, and on each side of this a very skillfully made fountain sprouted in the air lemonade, ginger beer, and other nice drinks, while the basin below ran pure rich cream, which you might spoon up at once without any further trouble. But prettier... Oh, sorry, can you hear the noise outside? I think someone's walking outside my door. But prettier than all were the dear little people who swarmed round by thousands, in and out, hurrahing and laughing and joking and singing, in short, raising that merry din which Mary had already heard from some way off. There were finely dressed ladies and gentlemen, Arabs and Greeks, Highlanders and Indians, officers and soldiers, shepherds and sailors, Grand Turks and tomfools, harlequins and columbines, in fact, all kinds of people that you might find in the world. At one corner the tumult grew greater, the people thronged together, for just then the Grand Mogul had himself carried in by a palanquin. I think that's like a sort of carry thing that you have on your shoulder. I don't know. I think they sort of carry him on his shoulder on a seat, attended by 93 grandees of his realm. But it happened that at the other corner the Guild of Fishermen, 500 strong, were holding their festival, and it was a pity that at that very same time the Turkish Sultan had the idea of taking a ride over the marketplace with 3,000 janissaries, and yet another solemn procession, clanging and chorusing, crowded round the cake tree. What a pressing and pushing and shoving and quarrelling then came about. Soon, too, there were many cries of distress, for in the crush a fisherman had knocked off a Brahmin's head, and the Grand Mogul was nearly upset by a tomfool. Wilder and wilder rose the din, and the crowds were already falling to blows, when a man in a brocaded gown, who at the gate had greeted Nutcracker as prince, climbed up on the cake tree, and after 3 times ringing a very clear tinkling bell, called out thrice, "Confectioner! Confectioner! Confectioner!" And at once the tumult was calmed, everyone trying to escape from the confusion as best he could. And when the entangled procession had got clear of each other, the muddied Grand Mogul had been brushed clean and the Brahmin's head set on again, the merry uproar broke on anew. "What does it mean, that confectioner, dear Herr Drosselmere?" asked Mary. "Ah, my good Miss Darbaum," answered Nutcracker, "confectioner is the name given here to an unknown but very dreadful power of which people believe that it can do with them what it will. It is the fate that rules over this merry little folk, and they fear it so much that through the mere mention of its name the greatest tumult can be appeased, as Mr. Burgomaster has just shown us. Everyone then thinks no more of earthly things, of pushes in the ribs or bumps on the head, but retires into himself and asks seriously, what is man and what is his destiny? I could do with that in my house. It gets quite riotous sometimes. Oh, it's not the thing. As you might sometimes hear the banging and crashing outside my door. Have a house full of people. I'd quite like to go confectioner, confectioner, confectioner sometimes and have them all running away. Not really. Not really. Anyway, I will see you all tomorrow, actually. I'm going to read the second half of the chapter tomorrow, and then I'm going to move that, that's better, up like that. And then Kate will be back the day after with the end of the story. So I will see you tomorrow. I'm going to go off and ring my bell and shout confectioner to my family now. All right then, bye-bye.